You've been doing almost everything right. You arrive before the others. You stay after most of them leave. You do the work that your colleagues should have done. You solve the problems that nobody else noticed existed. You have the ideas that somehow end up in the next team meeting with someone else's name on them. And year after year, the promotions go elsewhere, the recognition goes elsewhere, the visibility, the opportunities, the acknowledgement, none of it lands where you expected it to. So you ask yourself the question that most people in your position eventually ask: what am I doing wrong? Here's the answer that nobody gives you. Probably nothing. The system isn't broken. This isn't bad luck. It isn't a personality flaw. The workplace is doing exactly what it was designed to do. And that's the uncomfortable thing about systems. Once you understand what they were actually built to reward, they stop feeling random. They start making a terrible kind of sense. Today, that's what we're going to break down. The real psychology behind why the best person in a room is routinely not the person who advances. Not because of vague bad luck or cultural problems, but because of documented, named, researched psychological mechanisms that almost nobody in a traditional career is ever taught to understand. We're going to look at the myth of meritocracy, not as a political argument, but as a psychological one, backed by organizational research. We're going to look at something called visibility bias and why it has more influence over your career trajectory than your last 5 performance reviews combined. We're going to look at what organizational psychologists, the people who study these systems for a living, actually find when they examine how corporate advancement really works. And at the end of this, you're going to understand something that most people spend their entire career not knowing. Not because it's secret, but because nobody in a position of power inside these systems has any real incentive to tell you. Start the clock. This one changes how you see Monday morning. Here is something almost nobody knows about the word meritocracy. It was invented in 1958 by a British sociologist named Michael Young. He wrote a book imagining a future society built entirely around rewarding people based on ability and effort. Intelligence plus effort equals merit. Merit equals advancement. Clean, logical, fair. Except Michael Young didn't write it as a vision to aspire to. He wrote it as a warning. Young was trying to describe something dangerous, a world where a new ruling class would form, one more difficult to challenge than any aristocracy before it, because unlike inherited wealth, they would genuinely believe they deserved their position, that their success proved their superiority, and that everyone below them had simply not worked hard enough. He meant the word to sound alarming. It didn't land that way. Somewhere between 1958 and the modern job posting, a warning became a promise. But here's where this stops being a historical footnote and starts being about your career. In 2019, a study published in the journal Management Science ran a series of experiments across multiple organizations. In some conditions, managers were explicitly told their decisions would be evaluated for fairness. They were operating, they were told, under a meritocracy. What the researchers found was not what they expected. The managers who were told to be meritocratic showed more biased outcomes, not less. When people believe they're being fair, they stop auditing themselves. They trust their instincts. And those instincts, built from years of unconscious pattern recognition, similarity preferences, and social conditioning, are not neutral instruments. They are machines that have been running on invisible inputs for decades. Emilio Castilla, an organizational researcher at MIT, found the same dynamic when studying pay-for-performance systems, companies with explicit, documented, structured frameworks for rewarding results. What Castilla found inside those systems was that men received higher bonuses than women with identical performance ratings. Same scores, same reviews, different money. This is not a conversation about gender politics. It's a conversation about something more fundamental than that. The systems we design to be objective are only as objective as the humans running them. And humans, as it turns out, have never been particularly good at that. The meritocracy isn't broken. It was never fully real to begin with. So if performance doesn't drive advancement the way we've been told it does, then what does? Part of the answer is something organizational researchers call visibility. Not what you do, but who sees you doing it. Imagine two people at the same company, same level of skill, comparable results, but one of them speaks in every meeting, volunteers for high-profile projects, sends updates that land in senior inboxes, makes their presence felt whether or not their contribution is exceptional. The other works quietly. They solve complex problems efficiently, speak when they have something genuinely valuable to add, and let their work represent them. Who gets promoted? In controlled organizational studies, the answer is almost always the first person. Not because their output is measurably better, because their presence is more felt. There's a psychological principle at the root of this. It's called the mere exposure effect, identified by social psychologist Robert Zions in 1968. The core finding: the more familiar something or someone feels, the more positively we evaluate them, automatically, below conscious awareness. In a workplace, the person whose name circulates, who is visible in leadership rooms, who sends the Friday update that appears in the VP's inbox, that person builds a felt presence that reads, to a decision maker, as confidence, as executive potential, as the right fit for the next step. Meanwhile, the person doing the actual work has built something different, a reputation for doing the work, which sounds like it should be enough. It isn't. Thomas Chamorro Premusic, a researcher at University College London, has spent years studying what he calls the confidence gap, the documented and consistent tendency for people, particularly in organizational settings, to confuse confidence with competence. Leaders who appear certain and decisive are rated as more capable, regardless of whether their actual decisions are better, which means the person in the room who is most sure, even when they are wrong, is often perceived as more qualified than the person who is more accurate but more measured in how they present that accuracy. And this doesn't happen because people are foolish. It happens because in most corporate environments, we don't have direct access to the quality of other people's thinking and decisions. We can't evaluate everyone comprehensively. So we use proxies. Confidence becomes a proxy for competence. Visibility becomes a proxy for value. The energy someone brings to a meeting serves as a proxy for what they produce when nobody is watching. The problem is that the proxy isn't the real thing, and the person who optimizes for the real thing is systematically invisible to the proxy. The system isn't measuring what it says it's measuring. It never really has been. Now we need to talk about social capital, because this is where the picture becomes genuinely uncomfortable. Jeffrey Pfeffer is a professor at Stanford Business School who has spent decades studying how power moves inside organizations. Not how org charts say it moves, but how it actually moves in practice. His conclusion, across years of research, is consistent and unsettling. Political skill is a better predictor of career advancement than job performance. Not slightly better, significantly better. What does political skill look like inside an organization? It looks like knowing who the real decision makers are. Not just the ones with titles, but the ones whose opinions carry weight in conversations that never appear in meeting minutes. It looks like understanding whose support you need to secure before a decision is formally made, not after. It looks like building relationships with the right people at the right time for the right purposes, in a way that feels natural rather than calculated. None of that appears on any job description you've ever read. And here's what makes this particularly important to understand. Organizations have a powerful incentive not to admit it, because if the people inside a company understood that advancement was more political than meritocratic, that at a certain level, relationship management matters more than result management, the psychological contract that keeps most employees motivated would not survive that knowledge. So instead, organizations perform meritocracy. They build performance review systems, rating scales, structured promotion processes, all of which creates the visible appearance of objectivity, while the actual decisions happen in conversations that are not documented, in dinners that are not minuted, in impressions formed over years of deliberate, invisible social investment. Lauren Rivera, a sociologist at Northwestern University, spent years inside elite professional firms, investment banks, law firms, management consulting companies, studying how hiring decisions were actually made at the point of selection. What she found was that evaluators were not primarily selecting for skill or raw potential, they were selecting for fit. And fit, in practice, almost always meant this person feels familiar. This person feels like someone I'd be comfortable working alongside for a long time. This person feels like one of us. Which means the most powerful predictor of whether you advance inside a system is not whether you're more qualified than the alternatives. It's whether the people with power in that system feel comfortable around you. That is not a comforting finding, but it is an accurate one. There's one more mechanism that ties all of this together, and it explains something that might be the most persistent error most working people make when they try to understand why the system works the way it does. It's called survivorship bias. The concept was identified in World War II by a statistician named Abraham Wald. The military was analyzing patterns of bullet damage on planes that returned from combat missions, trying to figure out where to reinforce the aircraft's armor. The obvious thinking was, add armor to the areas that show the most damage. Wald pointed out the problem. The planes they were studying had made it back. The planes that had been hit in other areas, the ones not represented in the data, hadn't returned at all. The military was making decisions based entirely on the survivors. The evidence they couldn't see was the most important evidence there was. The exact same error plays out inside organizations every single day. We look at the people at the top, the executives, the senior directors, the people who seem to have successfully navigated the system, and we reverse engineer their path. They worked late, so we should work late. They raised their hands for every opportunity. We should do the same. They networked aggressively. They had mentors. They were confident in meetings. But we never study the people who did all the same things and didn't advance. We never analyzed the careers that followed identical trajectories and arrived at completely different outcomes. We don't account for timing, geography, which manager you happen to be assigned to, which industry cycle you were in, which executive happened to notice you at which moment. All the factors that have nothing to do with what you did at your desk on a Tuesday afternoon, but that determined everything about what happened next. And because we only ever see the people who made it, we assume what they did is what caused their success, when what the evidence actually suggests is that what separates someone who advanced from someone who didn't often has far less to do with individual performance than with structural position and circumstance. That conclusion is uncomfortable. It is also far more honest than the alternative. So what do you actually do with this? I want to be clear about what I haven't been saying. I haven't been saying that hard work doesn't matter. I haven't been saying that skill is irrelevant, and I'm not suggesting that the system is so fixed that nothing you do makes any difference. What I'm saying is this: competence gets you into the building. It is the price of entry. But once you're inside the building, once you're past the threshold of baseline performance, the rules shift completely. And most people keep playing the first game without realizing that the room they're now standing in is running an entirely different one. Understanding this is not cynicism, it's the opposite of cynicism, because the moment you see what the system actually rewards, which is visibility, social capital, political skill, the appearance of confidence, you can make a deliberate, informed choice about how to respond to that knowledge. You can decide to develop those skills. You can choose organizations where performance is more genuinely rewarded. You can build something where you control the rules entirely. You can decide which game you actually want to play and play it consciously, but none of those choices is available to you while you believe the myth. While you're telling yourself that the next strong performance cycle will finally be recognized, that the next project will be the one that changes things. You are playing a game whose real rules nobody handed you. The people who move through corporate environments on their own terms know something that most employees never learn. They understand that a workplace is a social and political ecosystem as much as it is an operational one, and they operate within that ecosystem accordingly, not cynically, strategically. That distinction between cynicism and strategy is going to be the thread that runs through everything we explore on this channel. If this is the first time someone has actually told you the truth about how the office works, the real mechanics, not the version in the employee handbook, then this channel was built for you. Every week, we're going to go deeper into the psychology of the workplace, the power dynamics most people never see, the research that explains what you've always felt but couldn't quite name, the hidden behavior patterns that shape who advances, who gets sidelined, and why. Subscribe if you've ever felt like the most capable person in the room who somehow keeps getting overlooked. Because now you know, it was never just about capability. And we're just getting started.